For thousands of years, it seemed as though a shadow had settled over Europe. Human progress appeared stalled, knowledge quietly slumbered behind the locked doors of ancient libraries, and bold ideas lay confined within a restless silence. But was it truly the Church alone that held humanity captive in this prolonged darkness? Or does history conceal a far more intricate and nuanced story? Tonight, with Bedtime History, we venture gently into the deepest, quietest corners of history, exploring mysteries never fully solved. Did the Church truly delay human advancement for 1,000 years? Or does history reserve secrets far more subtle and profound than we've imagined? Lie back softly, close your eyes, and allow these soothing reflections to guide you gently into a deep sleep as the answers continue to drift quietly within history's endless flow. Our story begins amidst the radiant splendor of ancient Rome, where Greek knowledge once flowed freely like an expansive river, spreading throughout every corner of the Roman Empire. The Greeks left behind extraordinary legacies in the writings of Plato, Aristotle, and Euclid, the ingenious inventions of Archimedes, and the astronomical discoveries of Ptolemy. This wisdom acted as a guiding light, tirelessly pushing civilization forward. But one day, even the mighty Roman Empire slowly closed its doors, plunging Europe into centuries of darkness and oblivion. From the ashes of ancient Rome, a new power gradually arose, faintly glowing like a candle in the pitch-black night: the Catholic Church. At first, this institution played the role of guardian and protector of ancient knowledge, carefully preserving precious texts within secluded monasteries deep in dark forests. Monks patiently copied each aged page under flickering candlelight, their whispered prayers flowing gently through the silence of the night. These meticulous writings became the first bricks in a bridge connecting a glorious past with an uncertain future. Yet what transformed the Church from guardian of knowledge to an institution accused of hindering scientific progress and free thought? To understand more deeply, let's journey into a small medieval Italian village where humble peasants quietly lived simple lives, diligently working each day, following the guidance of priests, firmly believing this was the only path leading them toward God. At this time, the Church held virtually complete control over the knowledge. All understanding of nature, the vast universe, and life's deepest mysteries had to pass through the lens of theology and be approved by those who represented divine authority on earth. This gave rise to a haunting paradox. Knowledge was preserved yet locked away like treasure in a high ivory tower, inaccessible to curious souls yearning for intellectual freedom. Ideas that challenged established doctrines faced suspicion, accusations of heresy, and severe punishment. The image of Galileo Galilei, forced to renounce heliocentrism before the Church tribunal, remains one of the era's most poignant examples. A brilliant astronomer and mathematician bowed beneath religious authority, publicly renouncing a truth he knew to be correct, simply to save his life. But while criticizing the Church is easy, understanding why the Church behaved as it did requires deeper reflection and fairness. We must recognize that in the chaotic and unstable medieval world, the Church served as a sturdy anchor, holding society from drifting aimlessly. Rigidity and dogmatism sometimes became necessary tools to maintain order and stability, especially when humanity wasn't yet prepared for significant upheaval. Yet this was also a double-edged sword, protecting yet restraining, providing safety while simultaneously barring the gates toward progress. Across centuries, the pressure of doctrine and authority fostered a stifling atmosphere within society. A quiet yet powerful tension brewed between old knowledge and new discoveries, between unwavering faith and the seeds of doubt slowly germinating within individuals who hungered for intellectual freedom. It was these paradoxes that gradually nurtured the seeds of change, as people began realizing the world was far larger than what the Church permitted them to see. These subtle movements, seemingly insignificant at first, were the early signals of a civilization waking from centuries of slumber. Explorations to the New World, Gutenberg's groundbreaking printing press, and the explosion of Renaissance ideas emerged one after another, forming an unstoppable wave of change. These events marked humanity's gradual breaking of the chains that the Church had imposed upon knowledge and thought. And now, as the light of reason began to penetrate the dense darkness of outdated doctrines, people started realizing that the Church wasn't entirely the absolute darkness they once imagined. Instead, it was more like a shadow stretching alongside the emerging light, simultaneously a remnant of the past and a reflection of humanity's striving toward the future. But would it be fair to conclude the Church alone was responsible for holding humanity back? Or was the Church an inevitable part of humanity's painful maturation process? This is a question each individual must ponder deeply, seeking their own answers as they continue forward through the ever-unfolding pages of history. Imagine yourself standing in the courtyard of a medieval monastery, surrounded by ancient stone walls, blanketed in lush green moss, silently greeting the day's final rays of sunlight as they slowly vanish beyond the horizon. This place is not merely a haven for spiritual refuge, but also the last fortress, protecting precious knowledge from the relentless erosion of time and the destruction of war. Flickering candlelight gently illuminates ancient books resting quietly on an old wooden table, as if they've been lost in centuries-long sleep, patiently waiting for a gentle hand to awaken them. And the monks who spent their lives in prayer and labor quietly became the anonymous guardians of this ancient treasury of knowledge. With remarkable patience, they carefully copied each word, each fragile page, cherishing every letter as if safeguarding precious gems from the passage of time. Without their tireless devotion, the classic works of Aristotle, Plato, and Cicero might have vanished forever into the dusty shadows of history. Yet from within these silent stone walls, another truth gradually revealed itself. The library, symbolizing wisdom and progress, had become locked away by those who once safeguarded it. In a world dominated completely by the Church, all knowledge had to be filtered through the lens of theology. Valuable books were not permitted to freely expand humanity's horizons. Rather, they could exist only if they aligned perfectly with the strict dogmas and fixed ideas of the era. Thus arose a painful contradiction. Knowledge was preserved, yet simultaneously strictly limited, like precious treasure locked within a secure chest, with the key closely guarded by those in power. Amid this profound silence, the gaze of history slowly shifts toward a man whose fate embodies the irreconcilable tension between science and dogma, Galileo Galilei. Galileo has become a powerful symbol of the eternal struggle between reason and belief, new discoveries and entrenched doctrines. In Pisa, on a quiet night, Galileo raised his eyes toward the infinite sky, his heart filled with a yearning for discovery, beginning a journey he could scarcely have imagined would thrust him into the fierce whirlwind of history. Galileo did something unimaginable in that era. He pointed his telescope toward the heavens, revealing for the first time sights humanity had never been permitted to witness. Distant stars, moons orbiting Jupiter, the rugged landscape of our own moon. All these discoveries fundamentally shook beliefs held sacred for millennia. To Galileo, the universe was far grander than anything church doctrine or theology had ever acknowledged. Yet rather than being celebrated as a great explorer, he was viewed as a disruptor of order, someone planting dangerous seeds of uncertainty within society's collective mind. Because in the eyes of the church, new knowledge carried the risk of collapsing established pillars of faith. Uncontrolled knowledge was dangerous, and Galileo, through his extraordinary courage and unwavering determination, became the embodiment of that tension. Before the tribunal of the church, his eyes still burned with a profound belief in scientific truth, yet his legs trembled as he was forced to publicly deny his discoveries in order to preserve his life. That moment became etched forever as a painful scar in historical memory, a heartbreaking instant when reason bowed to the overwhelming power of religious authority. Yet did the church truly intend to stifle knowledge, or was it simply overwhelmed by fear of uncertainty and change? Was their reluctance rooted in mistrust of humanity's ability to handle intellectual freedom, or merely an effort to shield fragile souls from an overwhelmingly vast and mysterious world? These unanswered questions linger within thoughtful silence, echoing softly through monastery corridors that have been weathered by time. And thus, the medieval library remained locked, sealed by fear and suspicion. Books lay quietly in the shadows, awaiting a day when the light of freedom would finally stream through narrow cracks, waking them from their long, timeless sleep. The monks, hearts filled with contradiction, protecting knowledge yet fearing its liberation, would forever remain figures caught between two opposing worlds, tradition and progress, fear and courage, past and future. As dusk fades away, the monastery's shadow dissolves slowly into the deep night, leaving behind a thoughtful silence. Now, we no longer walk merely through the worn stone corridors of monasteries. We venture deeper, stepping into the very consciousness of medieval society. This was a world dominated not by the clear light of reason, but by two far stronger forces, power and fear. In the cold darkness of what we now call the Dark Ages, each person lived cautiously, wary of what they did not fully understand. The outside world was mysterious and threatening. Natural disasters, plagues, and constant wars sowed terror, leaving people feeling helpless. They needed something to believe in, an anchor for their fragile souls in a world too vast and too harsh. At this moment, the church appeared as a savior, a faint but unwavering light in endless darkness, promising eternal salvation. Yet this sense of security came at a steep price: absolute obedience and the abandonment of intellectual freedom. What made the church fear new ideas so deeply? Why did an institution proud to call itself the guardian of knowledge become suspicious of the very wisdom it preserved? The answer perhaps lies not only within the church itself, but also deeply embedded in the psychology and nature of the people of that time. In medieval Europe, society was constantly haunted by insecurity. Whenever a new idea emerged, it was not merely an exciting discovery or an intriguing new horizon to explore, it was perceived as a potential threat to social stability. New ideas undermined established foundations and threatened deeply held values. Those in power knew that if traditional beliefs were shaken, their authority would inevitably come under scrutiny. And when power faced the threat of collapse, its natural response was always suppression. In the unstable political climate of that era, the church was not just a religious institution, it was Europe's most powerful political force. Kings and nobles constantly battled each other, fighting bitterly for influence, plunging the entire continent into endless conflicts. As the highest spiritual authority, the Church acted as an authoritative arbitrator amid these struggles. Its strength rested on the absolute obedience of the population, obedience that could only be maintained if the people wholeheartedly believed the Church was the sole source of indisputable truth, immune to questioning or denial. This reality drove the Church toward extreme caution regarding innovation. New ideas didn't just challenge doctrine, they risked destabilizing the very social order the Church desperately sought to preserve. When Copernicus published his heliocentric theory, or Galileo pointed his telescope toward the heavens, they were not merely making scientific discoveries, they were fundamentally shaking beliefs society had clung to for centuries. To the Church, such discoveries felt like earthquakes capable of shattering the fragile power structure painstakingly reinforced by absolute dogma. But deeper than even the desire for power, this fear arose from a fundamental human trait, the fear of the unknown, the uncertainty inevitably brought by new ideas. People of that time were terrified that if their deeply held beliefs were proven wrong, their entire spiritual world would collapse. It was akin to a dark room suddenly illuminated by a beam of unexpected light, revealing hidden corners never before seen, sparking both curiosity and deep apprehension about what might lie within. Looking back, we can clearly see the paradox within the Church itself. It sought both to protect people from the psychological shocks of dismantled traditional beliefs and to sustain its absolute power in a rapidly changing society. The Church thus found itself suspended between two extremes, protection and control, compassion and dominance, good intentions and harsh political realities. Yet were these reasons enough to justify the pain, oppression, and severe limitation of knowledge? Perhaps the answer always lies somewhere within the complex grey areas of history. Those thinkers and scientists branded as heretics were not merely victims, they were courageous individuals bearing the tension between society's opposing forces, paving the way for future generations to walk more confidently along the path toward truth. Time now brings us to another setting, a place where great discoveries and beautiful scientific truths remained locked firmly behind solemn theological doors, where even the greatest insights were concealed within cautious and painful silence. To better understand these rigid limitations, let us quietly enter the small study of a 16th century scholar, Nicholas Copernicus. Within this modest room, the dim glow of candlelight flickers gently across pages, filled with trembling handwriting, numbers, and intricate sketches. Copernicus, both a priest and an accomplished astronomer, is silently recording the discoveries he painstakingly gathered over his lifetime. Yet deep in his heart lies a persistent unease, a vague fear of how the outside world might receive his findings. What he wrote was not merely scientific discovery, it was a quiet revolution against a theological tradition that had endured for more than a millennium. Copernicus's heliocentric theory starkly contradicted the orthodox theological belief that placed Earth at the center of the universe, the sacred place God created specifically for humanity, lending divine purpose to human existence. Publicly announcing his findings would mean facing fierce opposition, even risking accusations of heresy, an act seen as directly opposing the divine will of the Creator. Thus Copernicus chose a far more painful path. He concealed his groundbreaking discoveries in silence for decades. His research and meticulously gathered evidence were shared only among a small circle of trusted friends who themselves were cautious, quietly exchanging this dangerous truth. It was only near the end of his life, when his health was failing and time slipping away, that Copernicus finally permitted the printing of his masterpiece on the revolutions of the heavenly spheres. Holding the completed volume in his hands just before his death, Copernicus faced a stark, profound truth. The greatest discoveries dared only to emerge when he no longer needed to confront their consequences. But it wasn't only Copernicus. Almost all scientific knowledge during this period was forced to remain hidden beneath the protective veil of theology. Scientists had no choice but to carefully shape their research results to fit neatly within society's prevailing religious doctrines. Books on astronomy, physics, and medicine began by praising God, reaffirming the absolute supremacy of religious authority. If a discovery conflicted with established doctrine, it was either quietly suppressed or gently reframed to avoid contradicting unquestionable beliefs. Countless potential innovations, revolutionary ideas, and profound insights thus remained forever unpublished. They quietly disappeared into darkness or waited silently across generations for a more favorable moment. We will never fully know how much priceless knowledge was delayed or how much human potential was squandered in fear. The Church, always anxious about heresy and social instability, unintentionally created an incredibly harsh environment of self-censorship. There was no need to explicitly forbid anything, for every individual understood clearly the enormous price of stepping outside established limits, sometimes even at the cost of their own lives. Yet even within this suffocating atmosphere, a beautiful paradox quietly emerged. Forced to reconcile scientific thought with theology, intellectuals inadvertently fostered a deeply rigorous environment, compelling knowledge to mature and prove its worth more clearly than ever. Scientists like Copernicus and Kepler, pressured to present their ideas safely, ended up developing exceptionally meticulous and subtle arguments. In the shadows of restriction, human thought grew sharper, more vigorous, and deeper. Thus, we realize history is never simple or one-dimensional. Whether the Church intentionally or unintentionally hid science behind theology, the resulting tension and limitations produced a uniquely determined and thoughtful group of intellectuals, quietly sowing seeds for the coming revolution, a revolution of reason and freedom of thought. Stepping out from Copernicus's modest room, we gently tread along winding cobbled paths, venturing deeper into the narrow alleyways of a small town cloaked in nighttime mist. Here and there, dim lights timidly shine through tiny windows, softly illuminating the cold stone walls. Behind these discreet shutters are people quietly nurturing an entirely different world, a world where the passionate pursuit of knowledge burns brightly, defying all dangers and the strict controls imposed by the Church. Within this silence and shadow, subtle signs of resistance began to emerge. New ideas and beliefs spread quietly among trusted circles, like small flames passed carefully from hand to hand through an endless night. These were not bold proclamations shouted openly in town squares, but whispered conversations, meaningful glances exchanged in secrecy, and books hidden behind the solid stone walls of quiet rooms. A silent yet powerful movement, unnamed but unmistakably strong, began to take root within this heavily controlled society. The role of these secret thinkers was undeniably significant, though their names rarely appeared clearly in official historical records. Among them were alchemists viewed by the Church as eccentrics chasing impossible dreams, attempting to turn lead into gold, searching for the philosopher's stone, or seeking an elixir of immortality. Yet behind the mysterious veil of alchemy, they were actually engaged in something far more profound, exploring nature's hidden laws, laying crucial foundations for modern chemistry, and daring to envision a world not entirely dictated by religious doctrines. Astrologers, dismissed as mere believers in fate and predestined destinies written in the stars, also contributed quietly but significantly to this unstoppable transformation. Although routinely mocked or condemned by Orthodox clergy, Astrology embodied a profound belief in humanity's intrinsic connection with the universe, a revolutionary idea in an era that believed the world was fully determined by God's perfect plan. Astrologers did not simply interpret stars to predict personal fortunes, they effectively asserted that the natural world operated according to objective laws that humans could observe, understand, and even predict. But it wasn't only alchemists or astrologers who participated in this subtle current of resistance. Many scholars, even priests and monks themselves, quietly joined this hidden intellectual stream. Outwardly, they appeared completely obedient to church teachings, strictly adhering to every rule and doctrine. Yet within their minds, a relentless torrent of unanswered questions simmered beneath the surface. It was precisely this deep contradiction that created a uniquely charged intellectual atmosphere within medieval society, a society seemingly obedient externally, yet internally fueled by an unquenchable flame of hidden defiance. This external submission combined with inner resistance profoundly reflected a society attempting to reconcile tradition with innovation, authority with freedom. Within this tense environment, human intellect became sharper, new ideas faced intense scrutiny, and ultimately, truth emerged clearer and stronger than ever before. Forbidden books were discreetly passed from hand to hand, secret conversations unfolded quietly behind closed doors, and letters traveled cautiously along winding routes, all becoming quiet, yet unmistakable signals that despite the Church's determined attempts, it could never fully control the human thirst for knowledge. Once knowledge had taken root in the fertile soil of human hearts, it would inevitably find a way to germinate, rise, and flourish more powerfully than ever before. As the faint glow from secret rooms quietly fades into darkness, our footsteps gently lead us toward a wider, newer space, a place seemingly still under the shadow of church authority, yet quietly nurturing the inevitable seeds of change. This is the scene of medieval Europe's first universities, places where, within solemn silence and strict discipline, the earliest seeds of reason began to sprout, slowly seeking daylight through thick layers of dogma. These early universities emerged as an inevitable consequence within this paradoxical historical flow. Initially, the Church established them with the explicit purpose of training loyal servants, priests and legal scholars well-versed in doctrine, entirely devoted to upholding the existing power structure. But just as a river always finds its way back to the ocean despite efforts to divert its course, knowledge, once planted, inevitably grows in its own unpredictable and uncontrollable ways. Even in the dignified lecture halls beneath the towering stone arches of Paris, Bologna, Oxford, and Cambridge, professors and students began to engage in discussion and debate. At first, these debates were limited, mainly revolving around theological issues. Yet even these conversations planted in young minds an extraordinarily powerful idea. The world was not simply something to believe in blindly, but something to question and understand. Each small, quiet question became a significant step toward breaking free from the dense darkness of dogma. Slowly but persistently, these universities unintentionally became nurturing grounds for critical thinking. Within the safe confines of theology, philosophy, and law classes, vibrant discussions became increasingly common. Gradually, people moved from passively receiving knowledge to actively questioning, doubting, and analyzing it. This shift marked a profoundly important turning point, from dogmatic thought to rational inquiry. One of the most significant figures embodying this subtle transformation was Thomas Aquinas, a great theologian of the 13th century. Aquinas did not reject theology, rather he spent his life strengthening and refining it. But in building his vast theological philosophical system, Aquinas did something revolutionary. He integrated Aristotle's philosophy, once seen as pagan, into the core of Catholic thinking. By harmonizing faith with reason, Aquinas inadvertently opened a new door, allowing people to use reason to understand faith rather than merely accepting it blindly. Perhaps the Church at that time could never have imagined that the universities they established and the people they educated would become the most powerful seeds of the coming awakening. Critical thinking, although tightly restricted and controlled, began to spread uncontrollably. It flowed like a small stream, quietly slipping through every crack, gradually strengthening until it would inevitably break through every barrier, carrying human knowledge toward new, unexplored horizons. Ironically, the Church's attempt to control knowledge unintentionally created the perfect environment for intellectual innovation. The struggle between absolute authority and the yearning for intellectual freedom forced scholars and students to sharpen their minds with extraordinary precision and care. Under pressure, human intellect became stronger than ever, learning not only how to receive knowledge, but also how to defend, cultivate, and sustainably expand it. Thus, quietly and unobtrusively, a significant shift took root within society. The Church still held absolute spiritual authority, yet beneath its outward unity and obedience, the seeds of independent thought began rising powerfully. Each debate, each lecture, each thesis became a small stone building, a solid foundation for profound changes yet to come. As we stand silently in the courtyards of these ancient universities, gazing up at moss-covered stone arches, we clearly sense that history never moves in a straight line. Instead, it unfolds through beautiful and surprising paradoxes. Often, it is precisely within the greatest constraints that the most significant ideas quietly take root and grow stronger than ever before. From the ancient halls of medieval universities, with their interplay of shadows and light, our steps continue onward, bringing us into an entirely different setting, a modest printing workshop tucked away in a quiet street corner in 15th century Mainz, Germany. Here, amidst the steady clatter of small metal letters, one of humanity's quietest yet greatest revolutions began to take shape. Johannes Gutenberg, a humble and unassuming goldsmith, likely never realized that his invention was more than just a technological advancement. It would utterly transform the landscape of knowledge in the Western world. When Gutenberg completed the first printing press with movable metal type, he did more than merely produce clearer pages of printed text. He opened an invisible door, liberating knowledge from monastery walls and private libraries, allowing it to spread further and faster than ever before. Before Gutenberg, books were luxurious, rare commodities. Only monks or wealthy nobles could afford these meticulously hand-copied manuscripts, keeping knowledge locked under the Church's tight control. But Gutenberg's modest printing press shattered that monopoly. For the first time in history, books became affordable, easily reproduced, and accessible to ordinary people. As printed texts began circulating, the ideas they carried quietly permeated every alley, street, and home, forever altering how humanity viewed the world. Initially, the Church didn't immediately recognize the danger posed by Gutenberg's small invention. They even welcomed the newfound ease of disseminating the Bible and religious texts widely and efficiently. Yet in that seemingly harmless moment, their absolute control over knowledge began to unravel. Once knowledge was no longer limited by painstaking hand-copying and rigorous monastic censorship, it became unstoppable. From a small stream, thin pages gradually grew into a powerful flood, washing away barriers of authority and suppression. Inevitably, books beyond the Church's direct control began to emerge. Translations of the Bible into common languages, revolutionary philosophical works, and scientific treatises previously confined to secrecy quickly spread, silently challenging church authority. On every street corner, secret books were passed from hand to hand, planting new ideas like tiny yet powerful seeds, awaiting their moment to flourish. What the Church had feared most became a reality. Once knowledge escaped their grasp, nothing could prevent people from asking questions, seeking answers, and ultimately freeing themselves from centuries of intellectual dependence. By the time this realization dawned, it was already too late. The printing press was no mere machine. It became a vivid symbol of intellectual freedom. Books continued to appear relentlessly, impossible to recall or fully destroy. They spread like an unstoppable flame, burning through every restriction the Church had painstakingly built up over 1,000 years. In that turbulent moment, the silent printing revolution created deeper changes than any revolt or battle ever could. Without fanfare or clashes on bloody battlefields, this revolution quietly unfolded in small homes, distant villages, and tranquil towns. Printed pages, silent and seemingly fragile, proved the strongest weapons ever forged against the Church's intellectual monopoly. It is precisely through observing this quiet yet powerful printing revolution that we gain a profound understanding. History is never merely a struggle among great powers. Sometimes it is shaped by the simplest individuals and smallest inventions, which nevertheless hold extraordinary power to transform the world. Johannes Gutenberg, with ink-stained hands and a quiet gaze, probably never envisioned the impact he would have on history. Yet it was he who planted those essential seeds into the hardened soil of the Middle Ages, the seeds of intellectual freedom and universal knowledge. From this moment onward, a new era emerged, one where humanity was no longer confined by the narrow limits of dogma, but free to explore an ever-expanding horizon of understanding. While Europe was quietly taking its first tentative steps out of the shadows of dogma, another civilization to the east had long been silently preserving, protecting, and even reviving ancient wisdom, the Arab civilization. Across vast deserts beneath star-filled skies, cities such as Baghdad, Damascus, and Cordoba shone brightly with their vast libraries, bustling schools, and vibrant research centers. Here, the precious writings of Plato, Aristotle, Euclid, and Galen were not only preserved intact but studied and developed more deeply than ever before. Arab philosophers, mathematicians, and physicians like Al-Farabi, Avicenna, and Averroes not only inherited this ancient knowledge but elevated it, blending it with their own creative and scientific insights, forming a brilliant beacon amidst Europe's long intellectual night. From these luminous cities, a quiet stream of knowledge began to flow westward, gently crossing geographical boundaries and overcoming cultural and religious barriers to gradually return to Europe. Anonymous translators worked tirelessly and patiently, driven by an insatiable thirst for knowledge, carefully translating precious texts from Arabic into Latin. Toledo, a small city in Spain, became the vibrant center of this translation movement, the very point from which Eastern wisdom once again flowed powerfully into a Europe deeply thirsty for enlightenment. These translations did more than simply restore lost knowledge. They were truly the first rays of light waking Europe from its deep slumber of dogma. Profound philosophical works and intricate scientific treatises quietly began to infiltrate universities, monasteries, and scholars' private studies. They arrived subtly but powerfully, raising new questions, igniting fresh doubts, and sparking a fierce desire to better understand the world in which humanity lived. Yet the arrival of this new wave of knowledge from the East inevitably caused confusion and provoked strong reactions, from the church. To church authorities, these new ideas were dangerously foreign, even heretical. They viewed these works with suspicion, considering them a potential threat to the carefully maintained spiritual order. Consequently, the texts were strictly censored or limited to only a select few scholars who were thoroughly trusted by the ecclesiastical hierarchy. However, what the Church could not foresee was the innate nature of knowledge itself. Like water, it always finds even the smallest cracks to seep through barriers. Despite strict controls, precious books from the East continued to be quietly copied, translated, and shared among those hungry for understanding. European scholars began rediscovering Aristotle through the interpretations of Avicenna and Averroes, opening completely new perspectives on philosophy and the natural world. Arab scholarship, having synthesized and profoundly expanded ancient ideas, became a powerful inspiration, fueling a quiet yet far-reaching renaissance deep within European society. Initially, the Church sought to control and suppress this flow of knowledge, but gradually realized it could never fully stop the powerful current. More progressive scholars and clergy began to find ways to reconcile Eastern ideas with traditional teachings, initiating gradual but unstoppable change. Thus, Europe experienced a dual movement: fierce resistance from conservative voices, yet eager acceptance by those passionately seeking truth and progress. In this quiet exchange between two civilizations, ancient wisdom once again emerged, stronger than ever. The Church, willingly or not, was forced to confront the reality that the world was far more expansive than their doctrines had described. The light from the East, though treated with suspicion and control, persistently illuminated the European mind, awakening within people a profound longing for exploration and understanding that had been dormant for centuries. As the intellectual rays from the East gradually filtered through narrow windows and darkened rooms across Europe, something miraculous began to unfold, so quietly at first that no one truly recognized its significance. A new dawn was silently emerging, one that later generations would call by a profoundly meaningful name: the Renaissance. The Renaissance, even its name, evokes images of a spiritual spring blossoming after a long, dark winter. Across cities such as Florence, Venice, and Rome, the ancient knowledge of Greece and Rome, once thought lost, now surged back to life more powerfully than ever. Writers, artists, architects, and philosophers didn't merely look to the past with admiration. They actively reshaped and elevated classical ideas, integrating them with a rapidly evolving and increasingly complex world. The writings of Plato, Aristotle, and Cicero no longer lay hidden in secluded libraries. Instead, they became powerful sources of inspiration for thousands of young minds. From universities to public squares, from small cafes lining bustling streets to vibrant cultural salons, vigorous debates echoed everywhere about philosophy, the purpose of human existence, and the significance of freedom and human dignity. Gradually, a society long submerged in the shadows of unquestioning obedience began to awaken, questioning everything, and most importantly, daring to believe they could find answers for themselves. Amid this electrifying atmosphere, art became the most potent tool to challenge the long-held spiritual authority of the Church. Painters and sculptors no longer viewed their craft merely as an instrument to serve religion, but rather as a means to explore and express profound human values, natural beauty, and personal freedom. Michelangelo, with his emotionally charged masterpieces, Raphael, with his exquisite balance, and Botticelli, with his dreamlike elegance, all quietly asserted that humanity deserved to stand at the center of the universe, no longer passively submissive to rigid doctrines. Yet perhaps no one symbolized this transformation more fully and clearly than Leonardo da Vinci. a man future generations would reverently call the first true universal genius. Leonardo was not merely an artist, inventor, or scientist. He was a living symbol of intellectual freedom. For Leonardo, the world was an extraordinary mystery waiting to be explored, and he willingly devoted all his intelligence and talent to unraveling it, irrespective of church-imposed boundaries. Even as he created immortal paintings like The Last Supper or the Mona Lisa, Leonardo embedded in each subtle line, each nuanced expression, hidden philosophical reflections on humanity's true nature. But his exploration didn't stop with art. He also pioneered research in anatomy, physics, mathematics, and engineering. His notebooks overflowed with remarkable sketches and visionary ideas, ranging from the intricacies of the human body to fantastical machines and even the concept of human flight, all ideas that far exceeded what contemporary society could accept. Significantly, Leonardo never openly confronted the church. Instead, it was his wise silence, combined with gentle yet profound intellectual expression, that gave his work its greatest power. Behind the humility of an artist who considered himself simply a humble student of nature, Leonardo powerfully asserted humanity's right, and indeed its responsibility, to ask questions and seek its own answers, without needing approval or permission from any external authority. Of course, the Church recognized this threat clearly, but by then it lacked sufficient strength or justification to counteract it. Quiet yet revolutionary works of art and ideas had fundamentally altered human consciousness, shifting people from passive submission to proactive explorers who confidently believed in their capacity to understand the world around them. Thus, within the exhilarating spirit of the Renaissance, humanity for the first time dared to believe in its own inherent power. People began to recognize that intellectual freedom was not something granted by any authority, but a natural right belonging to every individual. This marked an extraordinary turning point, because once humanity embraced this understanding, there would be no turning back to the old ways again. From the gentle yet powerful glow of the Renaissance, where Leonardo da Vinci and his contemporaries quietly planted the seeds of intellectual freedom into humanity's consciousness, we now softly step forward into another turbulent historical moment, a moment when these seeds burst forth decisively, breaking through the hardened shell of dogma and authority that had ruled for centuries. On a cold morning, October 31st, 1517, in a small German town named Wittenberg, a solitary sound echoed through the quiet streets, the sharp strike of a hammer. Such a simple sound, yet its resonance would profoundly shake the foundations of Europe. Martin Luther, a young monk with determined eyes and a heart deeply driven by a sense of justice, was nailing his 95 theses onto the sturdy door of the town's church. These were no mere personal grievances. This was a declaration of open defiance against the absolute authority of the church, the strongest challenge Europe had witnessed in centuries. Luther never intended to destroy the church, at least not initially. His theses expressed his sincere desire to correct serious abuses within the institution, such as exploiting people's faith for wealth and power. However, as his pointed words swiftly spread across Europe, accelerated by Gutenberg's printing press, Luther inadvertently became the voice for widespread discontent and an unspoken longing for profound change. Initially, the church responded with anger and dismissiveness, regarding Luther as merely another insignificant rebel whose voice would soon be silenced by overwhelming power. But as thousands of printed copies of his theses began circulating among ordinary people in towns and villages, the church suddenly grasped the severity of the situation. For the first time in centuries, its seemingly invincible power faced an open challenge, not from a powerful king or army, but from the straightforward words and ideas of an ordinary man. Summoned before church tribunals, the emperor, and spiritual authorities, Luther was repeatedly ordered to recant his statements. Yet, with unwavering resolve and sharp clarity, Luther declared that he could not and would never retract his words unless someone proved him wrong through scripture and reason. In that moment, the church's authority was not only shaken, it cracked, exposing the vulnerability of a system previously thought absolute and eternal. The significance of Luther's Reformation went far beyond religious disputes. It wasn't merely an argument about theology or financial practices. Instead, for the first time in European history, an individual openly dared to stand against an institution that seemed immovable, armed solely with the power of independent thought and rational conviction. Luther's Reformation unwittingly opened a new era, one in which ordinary people began realizing that they possessed the right to think independently, trusting their own reason and judgment rather than blindly accepting dictates imposed from above. After Luther, intellectual freedom was no longer a privilege reserved only for scholars or elite artists. It became a universal right. Across alleys and small towns, ordinary citizens gained confidence to openly discuss religious, political, and social issues without fear. This initial collision between Luther and the Church marked a crucial turning point, the strongest awakening humanity had experienced after centuries submerged beneath dogmatic darkness. Though the Church continued attempting to suppress this spreading fire, all efforts proved futile. Knowledge and intellectual freedom, once unleashed, refused to return to their former restraints. From this moment onward, history ceased to be a single path determined by the Church, transforming instead into a vast, multi-dimensional stream, rich with possibilities, where every individual could freely explore, question, and seek answers for themselves. Imagine yourself standing in the Campo dei Fiori square in Rome on a chilly February morning in the year 1600. Here, beneath the fearful yet curious eyes of the gathered crowd, a fierce blaze roared upward, consuming the life of a man whose name the world would forever remember with profound sorrow and respect, Giordano Bruno. Bruno stood there with an extraordinary brightness in his eyes, even as flames crackled around him. This fire was not merely the Church's punishment for heresy, it symbolized the burning away of fear and a direct challenge to the centuries-old limitations imposed upon human thought. Bruno was neither a warrior nor a political leader. He was a thinker, a philosopher, whose brilliant mind and exceptional courage led him to declare ideas no one else had dared to express. He envisioned an infinite universe filled with countless worlds and endless stars, where Earth was merely one small planet among many, an idea starkly opposed to church teachings which placed Earth uniquely and divinely at the center of creation. Bruno boldly asserted that knowledge and free thought must transcend the boundaries enforced by the Church, insisting that truth could not be imprisoned behind even the most solid walls of dogma. Because of these daring ideas, Bruno was relentlessly pursued, imprisoned, tortured, and ultimately sentenced to death. The Church believed the flames would not only end Bruno's life, but would also destroy every seed of thought he had planted. Yet what they failed to anticipate was that the fire consuming Bruno's body would transform him into an everlasting symbol, a testament to the extraordinary courage of human intellect confronting absolute power and relentless control. Bruno's execution was more than a personal tragedy. It represented a profound tragedy for all of European civilization, as it watched a great mind destroyed by those who should have cherished and protected knowledge. His death etched itself deeply into Europe's collective consciousness, leaving behind a permanent scar, a lasting reminder of how precious intellectual freedom truly is, and how vulnerable it can be when confronted by blind authority and persistent fear. In the aftermath, an entire generation of European intellectuals fell into fearful silence. Many kept their boldest thoughts and discoveries hidden, terrified that they too might become the next victims on the Church's pyre. Yet within that painful silence, something remarkable quietly occurred. The fire that consumed Bruno did not erase him. Instead, it clarified and strengthened his ideas, making them more powerful and resilient than ever. Bruno became an enduring symbol of the ceaseless struggle between intellect and authority, reason and dogma, freedom and control. The flames that once destroyed his physical body became a brilliant spiritual torch, lighting the path for generations to come, reminding them always that truth must be pursued relentlessly, no matter the cost. From that moment onward, Bruno's name and story were whispered secretly at first, then quietly discussed in hidden conversations, until finally they became openly and forcefully acknowledged. The flames of heresy, once intended to destroy, had now become a guiding beacon for free thought, awakening minds still trapped in the darkness of fear. Bruno's body may have perished, but his death was never the end. It was merely the beginning of a long, challenging journey where humanity would continue tirelessly fighting to protect the freedom to think, explore, and discover the world. From Campo dei Fiori, where the flames consumed Giordano Bruno yet simultaneously ignited an immortal symbol of courage and intellectual freedom, we step outward toward the vast ocean, a moment when the world abruptly expanded, revealing horizons broader than ever before. As ships began crossing unknown oceans and discovering previously unseen lands, humanity realized that the world was far larger, far more complex, and extended far beyond the religious boundaries that had dominated for centuries. Facing this rapidly changing reality, the Church suddenly found itself unable to maintain its control, and a new era, an era of boundless exploration and free thought, quietly began. For centuries, the world was imagined as a small place with Europe at its center, and at the very heart of Europe stood the absolute authority of the Church. But in the late 15th and early 16th centuries, epic voyages started to change everything. Christopher Columbus, driven by a passionate belief, crossed the Atlantic and set foot on lands completely unknown. Vasco da Gama rounded the Cape of Good Hope, opening pathways to the rich lands of the East. Ferdinand Magellan, on his legendary journey, demonstrated conclusively for the first time that the Earth was indeed round, larger than anything described by the Bible or church teachings. These expeditions weren't merely geographical explorations, they were silent yet powerful revolutions in human consciousness. Upon reaching distant shores, encountering radically different civilizations, cultures and beliefs, Europeans began grasping a simple yet profoundly significant truth. The world was not a small domain carefully crafted by God exclusively for them. Instead, it was vast, diverse, and filled with mysteries far beyond anything traditional teachings had ever imagined. Initially, the Church attempted to control, explain, and even impose theological concepts onto these new territories. Missionaries accompanied exploration expeditions, hoping to bring the light of God to unfamiliar peoples. Gradually, however, the Church had to confront the harsh reality. It no longer possessed the power to contain the rapid and overwhelming changes occurring worldwide. The diversity, richness, and entirely new cultures encountered exceeded any possible explanation or control by church authorities. From a position of dominance, the Church now stood helplessly by as the world expanded beyond its grasp, evolving in ways nobody had anticipated. New maps were drawn, new books written, no longer describing Earth as a small, divinely ordained space. Instead, the world became an endless, vast expanse where humanity had to explore for itself, searching independently for the meaning of existence. A completely new mindset emerged and gradually spread throughout Europe. People began realizing they could no longer rely on outdated explanations or remain confined by rigid dogma. The world was larger, more complicated, and filled with realities entirely absent from the Bible. Religious authority, once absolute, began weakening and eventually crumbling, giving way to reason, science, and free exploration. Returning explorers told extraordinary tales of new lands, strange cultures, and astonishing ways of life. Each story acted like a small hammer, gradually cracking the rigid shell of dogma that had encased European minds for centuries. The world was no longer simply Europe, controlled by the singular authority of the Church. Now it was a place of countless beliefs, endless cultures, and numerous perspectives on existence and the meaning of life. And as these horizons expanded, the human mind could never again be closed. The harder the Church tried to suppress and control, the more clearly it exposed its own weakness and obsolescence. Intellectuals, scholars, and scientists grew bolder, confidently pursuing and proclaiming new truths, recognizing deeply that the Church could no longer maintain its monopoly in a rapidly expanding and diversifying world. Thus, from daring voyages across unknown seas, a new wave of thought emerged, more confident, bold, and free-spirited than ever before. Humanity now viewed the world no longer with fear and submission, but with eager curiosity and a passionate desire to explore. Ships crossing oceans were not merely geographical conquests. They opened entirely new horizons for the human spirit. Leaving behind the decks of sailing ships where explorations had quietly expanded humanity's view of the world, we now find ourselves on a quiet path leading to a peaceful English countryside in the 17th century. Here, beneath the gentle shade of an old apple tree, sits a young man named Isaac Newton, lost deep in contemplation, his mind venturing far beyond the understanding of his contemporaries. The familiar story of the falling apple, though simple, symbolizes a profound turning point in human thought. That singular moment wasn't merely an accident, it marked the instant scientific thought fully liberated itself from theological control. From that humble apple, Newton realized the laws governing the universe weren't inaccessible mysteries or divine secrets. Rather, they could be discovered, described, and predicted using reason, mathematics, and science. With his groundbreaking work, Philosophia Naturalis, Principia Mathematica, Newton laid the foundations of modern physics, outlining fundamental laws that explain the movement of everything, from the smallest grain of sand on a beach to distant giant planets spinning silently through space. But Newton's significance extended far beyond pure science. He embodied a subtle yet powerful shift, bridging traditional theological thought and modern scientific reasoning. Unlike scientists before him, Newton never openly confronted theology. Instead, he carefully used the language of science to gently reconcile these seemingly conflicting fields. For Newton, science didn't necessarily deny religion, nor did religion need to reject science. Instead, he believed both could coexist, enriching each other. Science, in his eyes, didn't erase God, it illuminated the divine order that governed creation. Newton's wise reconciliation fundamentally changed how European society viewed science. No longer something feared, alien, or heretical, science gradually became accepted as a reliable method for understanding and explaining the world. Step by step, the boundaries theology had imposed on knowledge were dismantled, opening the door to an entirely new world, a world where reason and empirical evidence became the foundational principles of human understanding. Quietly but decisively, Newton opened a new door for humanity, enabling us for the first time to stand confidently before the vast universe, no longer bowing humbly before its mysteries, but courageously seeking to understand them. After Newton, scientific thought ceased to be seen as a challenge to theology. It became a powerful, independent discipline fully capable of exploring and explaining our world. The profound implications of this shift were enormous. Science no longer needed to tiptoe nervously around religious authority. Instead, it boldly advanced, fully harnessing human creativity and intellect to uncover nature's secrets. Conversely, religion slowly recognized that resistance to science was impossible. Instead, it had to accept and even embrace this expansive flow of ideas. Newton, with his characteristic humility and extraordinary intellect, became a beautiful bridge, a symbol of reconciliation between timeless values and revolutionary discoveries, enabling both to coexist peacefully and respectfully. This reconciliation didn't diminish religion's role. Rather, it enriched human thought, offering deeper, more comprehensive insights into the universe around us and ourselves. Stepping through the peaceful doorway Newton gently opened, guiding us into a new era where science and religion began subtly reconciling, our journey now leads us onward to another place, more vibrant, more intense, where an unarmed yet fierce struggle unfolds, the battle between reason and faith, between the luminous clarity of enlightenment and the lingering shadows of traditional dogma. We find ourselves in the lively cafes of 18th century Paris, where young, passionate intellectuals gather nightly to debate, discuss, and sometimes fiercely argue over bold new ideas. This was the age of enlightenment, an era when reason and freedom of thought no longer hid in the shadows, but proudly stepped onto the political, social, and cultural stage. It was a time when humanity not only questioned, but demanded satisfying answers from every authority, even the most sacred power of the Church. Two figures vividly embodying the spirit of enlightenment were Voltaire and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, two brilliant thinkers whose incisive critiques defined this age. Voltaire, sharp-witted, humorous, yet unflinchingly critical, fearlessly wielded his pen against injustice, prejudice, and religious domination. He believed reason was humanity's brightest torch, and allowing blind faith to overshadow reason would only lead society into error and darkness. Rousseau, though quieter and deeper in demeanor, was equally powerful as he questioned society's origins, power dynamics, freedom, and the true nature of humanity itself. Rousseau challenged not only secular authority, but boldly confronted even the oldest religious doctrines and beliefs. He famously declared that humanity is born free, and any form of power, religious or secular, must be rigorously examined through the lens of reason. Thanks to voices like Voltaire's and Rousseau's, the Church gradually realized it no longer wielded absolute control over knowledge and thought. Enlightenment writings spread widely, public debates flourished in cities across Europe, and slowly but surely, the Church's authority in intellectual life began weakening significantly. Books previously banned and ideas formerly condemned became points of intense public interest, openly discussed and eagerly debated among scholars and ordinary people alike. Yet the battle between reason and faith during the Enlightenment wasn't about completely rejecting religious beliefs. Rather, It powerfully asserted that faith must be built upon reason, that people have both the right and responsibility to use their intellect to assess and choose their beliefs, rather than merely accepting doctrines imposed from above. This marked a profound revolutionary shift, overturning centuries-old traditional values. In this rapidly changing environment, the Church was forced to retreat, reluctantly acknowledging it could no longer fully control society's thinking. Trials for heresy and violent suppression became increasingly ineffective. New ideas, no matter how vigorously banned or suppressed, inevitably broke through barriers, rapidly spreading through the power of reason and humanity's irrepressible yearning for freedom. Within this struggle between reason and faith, humanity matured profoundly, gaining clearer insights into the immense value of intellectual freedom. The Church ceased to be society's sole arbiter of truth, becoming instead just one of many diverse voices coexisting and competing within a vast intellectual and cultural landscape. Free thought finally shattered its chains and boldly advanced, embracing a richer, more diverse world than ever before. From the bustling cafes of 18th century Paris, where reason boldly claimed its freedom from centuries-old church authority, our journey now moves onward toward a completely new land, one vibrating with the rumble of machinery, thick with smoke and steam rising into the grey skies. This is 18th and 19th century Britain, where the world once again stood at the threshold of profound change, the Industrial Revolution. Quiet, peaceful villages gradually vanished, replaced by sprawling, noisy industrial cities. Massive factories sprang up like giants rising from the earth, fueled by steam and steel. A completely new world was taking shape, one where applied science and technology were no longer abstract ideas confined to books, but powerful realities capable of utterly reshaping society, human life, and even human thought itself. Amid this rapid and unprecedented transformation, the role of the Church became increasingly diminished. Those who once possessed ultimate authority over society and human thought now stood helplessly on the sidelines, facing the stark reality that humanity was rapidly escaping their spiritual control. Groundbreaking inventions, the steam engine of James Watt, automated weaving machines, locomotives, and railroads emerged directly from reason, science, and technology, requiring neither approval nor validation from any religious authority. Science and technology became powerful, autonomous forces virtually impossible to restrain. Church leaders suddenly found this new power far beyond their reach. Unlike Galileo or Bruno's time, when discoveries had to cautiously evade authority or accept tragic consequences, science now strode forward confidently, free from fear of religious interference. It became an unstoppable current, impossible to halt. Railways stretched across Europe, powerful steamships sailed across vast oceans, enormous factories operated tirelessly day and night, all vivid symbols of a transformed world. Yet the changes weren't limited merely to technology or economy. They represented a profound shift in how people saw themselves and the authorities that once dominated their lives. The Church, which had long believed itself capable of directing humanity's path, could now only watch quietly as scientific and technological knowledge independently charted the course of history. For the first time in centuries, humanity moved forward without needing to look back or seek approval from anyone, guided solely by intellect and creativity. As the pace of the world accelerated, people began realizing true progress never needed permission from above. Technological creations and scientific discoveries not only enriched and empowered society but liberated human minds from traditional constraints, ushering them into an era where they became masters of their own destiny. This didn't mean religion vanished entirely, but clearly it ceased to control every aspect of life. Religious authority had been replaced by reason, science, and the boundless creativity inherent in humanity. It was undeniable. From this moment forward, humanity was no longer following a predetermined path, but rather forging ahead, boldly shaping its own future. Amid the roaring machinery and smoky skies of the Industrial Revolution, we clearly sensed that history would never return to its old ways. Human thought had truly freed itself from its final chains, rising confidently to take control of life and the future. A world now existed where science and technology directed progress, and advancement no longer had to wait or fear any other power. From the brightly lit laboratories of the 19th century, where science emerged as an unstoppable force, our footsteps now lead us into a different setting. A modest, quiet room nestled in the tranquil English countryside. Here, seated thoughtfully at a humble wooden desk, is a middle-aged man named Charles Darwin. The pages before him, once published, would profoundly shake Western civilization, marking the final, irrevocable collapse of dogmas the Church had fiercely protected for thousands of years. When Darwin stepped onto the deck of the HMS Beagle in 1831, he could never have imagined his journey would lead him to truths that would completely overturn humanity's understanding of itself and the natural world. Throughout his travels to distant islands, Darwin meticulously observed and recorded details of countless species, quietly uncovering a profound revelation. Every living creature, including humans, is the result of a natural evolutionary process spanning millions of years. There was no divine hand directly shaping creation, no miraculous instant creation of species as the Church had always taught. Instead, all life arose naturally, shaped through the relentless yet wondrous process of natural selection. When Darwin's landmark book on the origin of species appeared in 1859, the world instantly descended into shock. The Church faced a challenge unlike any before, not from abstract philosophies or mere technical inventions, but from a fundamental truth it had long claimed exclusive authority over: that humans were divinely created in God's sacred image, not products of nature's gradual evolution. The Church's reaction to Darwin was fierce, intense, and often harshly critical. He was denounced, ridiculed, and labeled as someone who threatened humanity's moral and sacred beliefs. Yet the controversy Darwin sparked went beyond simply defending a scientific theory. It became symbolic of a much deeper struggle, a struggle over thought itself, over how humanity viewed its identity, and over the courage to accept uncomfortable truths, even when they contradicted deeply ingrained beliefs. With Darwin, science directly challenged the very heart of religious dogma. Unlike earlier industrial inventions and technical advances, evolutionary theory didn't merely alter how people lived, it transformed their fundamental understanding of existence itself. This explains why the backlash was so fierce and emotional, and why the profound meaning of this debate resonated far beyond the boundaries of science, becoming one of the deepest, most significant cultural and intellectual controversies in Western history. Yet no matter how vigorously the Church tried to deny or suppress it, scientific truth had been revealed and could never be reversed. Evolution became an irreversible symbol of a societal shift in thinking. More than just a scientific theory, it signified a new age, an age when humanity finally freed itself from dogmatic control, boldly stepping into a world where reason and empirical evidence became the essential foundations for truth and understanding. Gradually, albeit reluctantly, many people began to accept the truth Darwin had uncovered. They realized faith and reason need not be irreconcilably opposed. Instead, they could coexist, each occupying a distinct role in human spiritual and intellectual life. Yet, undeniably, the world had changed forever. The rigid dogma of direct divine creation no longer exclusively governed human thought. Evolutionary theory, rooted in science, opened entirely new horizons, launching humanity onto a never-ending journey, a quest to discover its true origins and purpose within this vast universe. As scientific discoveries became increasingly powerful and decisive in explaining nature, religion faced an undeniable reality. It was no longer the sole absolute source of truth. Now religion confronted its greatest challenge, not through fierce rebellion, but through the quiet yet resolute advance of scientific knowledge and evidence so clear that it simply couldn't be denied. The Church recognized it had a choice: continue a futile fight or seek reconciliation by accepting that science and religion, though deeply different, could still coexist meaningfully and peacefully. In this changing context, theologians, scientists, and thinkers began searching for common ground, one where science did not completely dismiss religious faith, and faith no longer viewed science as a direct threat. Instead, they embraced parallel existence, acknowledging that each domain possessed its own unique role and value in helping humanity understand the world and itself. The first dialogues between science and religion were cautious, yet full of goodwill. Gradually, the Church adapted, striving to comprehend and accept undeniable scientific findings. Conversely, scientists started recognizing that there were deeper aspects of spiritual life, questions about meaning and human values, that science alone could never fully answer. Both sides gradually realized that they need not oppose each other. Rather, they could together enrich human understanding and experience. A clear example of these reconciliation efforts was Pope John Paul II's statements toward the end of the 20th century, openly acknowledging evolution as an undeniable scientific reality. This wasn't just a shift in perspective, it was a profound sign of the Church's maturity, humility, and willingness to adjust itself in response to an increasingly complex and diverse world. Yet reconciliation between science and religion has never been easy or simple. Deep within human minds, a persistent tension remains between the need for clear, precise truths offered by science and the profound yearning for meaning and sacredness provided by religion. This quiet, persistent struggle can never be entirely resolved. However, within that quiet struggle, humanity came to understand an essential truth. Our world, whether we like it or not, will always be pluralistic, filled with multiple truths, diverse perspectives, and numerous paths toward understanding ultimate reality. Religion and science each have their distinct roles and their own spaces to exist, develop, and serve humanity's varied needs. True reconciliation doesn't mean erasing differences, it means accepting these differences as inevitable, natural parts of human life itself. For thousands of years, the Church had defined truth and wielded absolute authority over society's beliefs and morality. Yet the storms of history, the revolutions in science and culture, shook this dominant position. Now, entering a pluralistic age, the Church is compelled to accept that it can no longer impose its views or truths upon the world. Instead, it must find and create a new role, a more compassionate and profound one, based not on authority and enforcement, but on empathy, understanding, and mutual respect. In this new context, the Church increasingly transforms into a deeply social organization, an influential moral voice gently reminding humanity of essential values: love, forgiveness, compassion, and charity. No longer merely guardians of rigid doctrines or dogmas, they now serve as protectors and advocates of fundamental human values, guiding people through a complex, uncertain world filled with new and difficult challenges. The Church hasn't abandoned religion, but it is redefining religion in broader, deeper terms. It no longer asserts absolute claims about supernatural mysteries or dogmatic authority. Instead, religion now serves as an ethical inspiration, a spiritual foundation to help people find meaning amid the turbulence and uncertainties of modern life. Statements and actions by recent popes, particularly Pope Francis, clearly reflect this profound transformation. Rather than exercising power through control or coercion, their messages are gentle, approachable, and deeply human, emphasizing environmental responsibility, compassion for the vulnerable, and unity in a world increasingly divided and unstable. Most importantly, the Church has learned to listen better. It no longer engages in monologues with the world. Instead, it actively dialogues, exchanges ideas, and learns from diverse voices in society. Recognizing that in a pluralistic world, no single truth can claim monopoly and no idea can be absolute, the Church acknowledges that everything must be discussed, weighed, and embraced as an essential aspect of contemporary life. This transformation has not been easy, and tensions remain between old traditions and new ideas. But the most significant point is that the Church itself now understands the modern world is no longer the world of the past. It is far more diverse, complex, and vibrant. To remain relevant, to continue playing a meaningful role in people's lives, the Church must adapt, continuously redefining itself in harmony with our changing world. As we look back through history, an important question emerges, one that helps us understand not only our past, but ourselves more clearly. Were all the constraints, delays, and suffering throughout human history truly the fault of the Church alone? Or were these outcomes inevitably shaped by deeper, broader forces far beyond the scope of any single religious institution? To answer this question, we must step back once again into the medieval world, a historical period often mistakenly seen as merely dark and stagnant. In truth, it was an incredibly complex era, a vast tapestry woven from countless intertwined political, economic, and social threads. Europe at that time was a continent of intense turmoil, marked by endless wars and relentless conflicts among nations and powerful aristocratic families vying for influence and dominance. In such a chaotic environment, the Church was not merely a spiritual organization. It was also a potent political entity, a critical mediator attempting to balance competing factions. Consequently, many Church decisions weren't purely driven by religious doctrine or ideology. They were deeply influenced by complex practical political considerations. In a world teetering on instability and upheaval, the Church's attempt to control knowledge and ideas wasn't always motivated by authoritarianism or a desire for dominance. Sometimes it was simply their only conceivable method to maintain social order and prevent complete societal collapse. Medieval society was fragile. New ideas or uncontrolled scientific discoveries could quickly disrupt the delicate balance that took great effort to maintain. Economic factors also played a crucial role. Medieval Europe's economy was primarily agricultural, characterized by limited technology and chronic uncertainty. People's livelihoods depended heavily on nature's whims, making their lives extremely vulnerable. In such a precarious environment, scientific innovations or radical new thoughts often met resistance, not because of deliberate suppression, but because society wasn't yet capable or ready to embrace and utilize these ideas effectively. In this sense, the Church often mirrored society's collective mindset, a cautious, even fearful attitude towards new, unproven ideas. Furthermore, Human nature and the psychology of the era also significantly limited progress. Humans tend to resist change, especially in times of uncertainty, like the medieval period. Regardless of how beneficial a new idea might be, it often caused anxiety because it threatened the fragile stability that people desperately sought. The Church, willingly or unwillingly, had to reflect and respond to these collective anxieties, often stepping into the role of regulator simply to prevent societal chaos. Yet, placing the entire blame on the Church for delaying progress lacks fairness and objectivity. Ultimately, the Church was merely one piece within the much larger structure of society, a society constantly evolving through a complex interplay of countless diverse factors. The crucial realization here is that history is never shaped by a single organization, individual, or authority alone. Rather, history emerges from a vast array of circumstances, decisions, interactions, and competing forces within society. The Church, despite all its faults and shortcomings, was only one part of this immense, intricate historical tapestry. Throughout thousands of years, the Church was not merely a force of control or imposition. Instead, it acted as a reflection of humanity's deepest psychological needs in every historical period, sometimes boldly moving forward, yet sometimes cautious and conservative, waiting patiently for moments safe enough to advance further. Like human beings themselves, the Church had moments of courage and strength, but it also experienced times of doubt, fear, and a longing for stability within a world full of uncertainty and challenges. The Middle Ages, often viewed today as a dark and stagnant era, serve as a clear example of this. The Church during that period wasn't simply irrationally authoritarian or backward-looking. Rather, it profoundly reflected society's collective mindset, a society struggling with unprecedented chaos, insecurity, and instability. In such a precarious environment, stability, even if it meant limiting new ideas, was something people deeply yearned for. Thus, the Church became an honest mirror, reflecting precisely that yearning for security. We must therefore understand that conservatism is not always a selfish or mistaken choice. It can be rooted deeply in human psychology. At times when everything seems fragile and vulnerable, people need something stable to cling to, something reassuring to rely upon, allowing them to confidently take the next steps. The Church, with all its imperfections and limitations, once played precisely this crucial role, a protector and a stabilizing force within society, even if that meant moving slowly, cautiously, and warily toward new, uncertain ideas. Yet within this very conservatism we discover something profoundly significant. The Church's greatest achievement was not merely preserving old values, but also providing a solid foundation upon which humanity could confidently take bolder steps when the time was truly right. The delays and limitations, despite causing pain and regret at times, also created necessary moments of pause, opportunities for deep reflection, self-examination, and better preparation for future progress. We now look upon history more gently and thoughtfully, not with judgmental or one-sided criticism, but with compassion and understanding. We see clearly that history isn't simply a matter of right or wrong, progress or stagnation. It is always a complex blend of countless competing factors, balancing the human need for advancement with the equally powerful desire for stability, courage alongside caution. Thus, the Church acts as a great mirror in which we can always see ourselves more clearly, understanding more deeply the complexities of human psychology and nature, especially during history's most difficult moments. That is why, rather than harshly judging, we should offer sincere compassion, because we ourselves, across every age, continually oscillate between progress and conservatism, bravery, and our deepest fears. Now we stand face to face with an unsettling truth that might forever trouble us. No matter how hard we try, history will never offer absolute answers. It will never hand us a definitive, clear-cut conclusion. The question, did the Church truly hold back humanity's progress for 1,000 years? Will remain eternally open-ended. It's not something we can simply answer with a yes or no. History is always a moving process, full of complexity and contradictions. Each time we believe we've found an answer, a new dimension emerges, a fresh perspective surfaces, forcing us to reconsider, to reevaluate from the beginning. This is precisely why such a question will forever spark debate. It's not merely a discussion among people holding different opinions. It's actually a profound debate between history's inherent contradictions. Every individual, shaped by personal experiences and perspectives, can find compelling arguments to either affirm or deny the Church's role in the course of human progress. Yet, no matter how persuasive and sharp these arguments are, they can always be challenged by other viewpoints, other approaches. This endless complexity is what makes history not a closed book of neatly concluded answers, but rather a continuous stream of understanding and awareness. We ask questions not to find final, definitive answers, but rather to keep digging deeper, seeing more clearly, and expanding our minds further. The true value of posing such significant questions lies not in conclusions, but in the journey itself. On that journey, we learn to view the world with broader, deeper, and more compassionate minds. We come to realize that history isn't merely about events already past, or stories already told. It's a constant reflection of ourselves, with all our limitations, hopes, mistakes, and magnificence. Each time we question the past, we're actually examining ourselves, striving to understand who we are, what motivates us to move forward, and what holds us back. Historical debates are never solely about the past. They are always about the present, about the future, and about the kind of world we wish to create. Thus, history will forever lack definitive answers, not because we aren't smart or knowledgeable enough, but because history by its very nature remains open and constantly changing. Each generation, each individual discovers their own answers, shaped by their unique needs, circumstances, and the questions they ask within their own time. Throughout this journey, we've encountered countless faces, countless events, profound ideas, and meaningful moments, both grand and small. We've witnessed the Church wield absolute power, inflict pain, and stifle progress. Yet we've also observed moments when the Church itself became a quiet guardian, preserving knowledge and nurturing the seeds of wisdom. We've learned that history is never simple, never one-dimensional. It is always multifaceted, always complex, always inviting us to look deeper, to understand more compassionately. Perhaps when asking if the Church truly held back human progress for 1,000 years, what we're really seeking is not a definitive answer, but rather an opportunity to better understand ourselves, our fears, our desires, the things we've once believed, and the things we're willing to leave behind. History, as we've seen, is a vast mirror reflecting the inner struggles, contradictions, and deep conflicts within our own minds. Every time we seek answers, we're actually examining our own souls, asking ourselves what we truly desire, what we genuinely believe, and what we're truly seeking in this brief life. Now, in this final, quiet moment, we no longer rush to seek further conclusions. Instead, we leave the question hanging gently in the air, like a soft breath amid the vast expanse of history. We recognize that perhaps the question itself is what matters most. Not the answer, not the conclusion, but the courage to ask, to ponder, to seek our own path amidst the complexities of this world. Thus, I invite you now, the one hearing these words, to reflect deeply, to ask yourself these questions anew, to look within your own heart and seek your own answers. There is no absolute right or wrong, no final conclusion. There is only you in this profound silence, looking deeply into yourself, understanding yourself more clearly than ever before. This moment is like a gentle, deep sigh amidst the vastness of history, a history filled with stories of people who lived, who loved, who suffered, who hoped. In that breath, we realize that each one of us, no matter how small, plays an essential part in this endless narrative, a narrative we are responsible for continuing through our own thoughts, actions, and choices. In truth, this story never really ends. It continues forever in each of our minds. Each time we revisit the past, each time we question, each time we reflect more deeply, the story is reborn, breathing with us, guiding us toward greater self-awareness and understanding of our world. We cannot change what has already happened, but we can always transform how we perceive it, how we learn from it, how we allow it to guide us further, deeper, along the infinite journey of self-discovery and understanding our world. And now, in this profound stillness, there's only one final thought I wish to share with you. Listen closely to your own heart. Allow yourself to be quiet, to reflect, to deeply contemplate. Seek your own answers, because ultimately that is what matters most, the personal truth that will forever remain, forever guide you on this endless journey of life.